So I found this mower for free sitting on the curb by using an app on my phone. But everything that's free isn't always worth picking up. And as you can plainly see, it has a major problem, but unfortunately, it may be a lot worse than it appears. So before we can make that call, we'll have to fix all of its problems. And unfortunately for us, there are a lot of them. In today's video, we're going to be taking a second look at this Murray lawnmower. And the problem is that we don't know much about it, but there's a very good chance it's not going to start for us. That's because if a mower isn't used for a while and it was not prepared for it, the carb might not work like it should. So I'm not an expert of any sort, but depending upon when this happened to it, I'm sure it wasn't used while it was like this. So you're going to have to take my word for this, but this is how I picked it up. I didn't take this wheel off. But of course the wheel isn't the biggest concern, but instead the bracket that's not attached to the mowing deck. You only have to glance at the mowing deck to realize why the bracket looks the way that it does. As you can tell, this mower has a problem with rust, but I've never seen one quite this bad before. Next, we'll lay it on its side, that way we can look not only at the bracket, but also the blade. What we're looking for on the blade is any kind of damage. The blade could be bent or the cutting edge might have a gouge in it. The surprising part is that there's practically no damage on it, which could mean it was replaced some time ago. It was also nice of them to mark which side of the blade faces the grass. So here's what we came to see, the thing that most definitely sidelined this mower. As you can tell, the rust finally compromised the metal in this part of the deck. It also didn't help that there were already several openings around the adjuster, but it's mainly to save on cost. Now I can't tell you why the wheel was off the axle, but looking at it, you'll notice something weird. So I tried to clean it, but then realized that there was packaging tape around it. That could only mean one thing. The opening in the wheel must be worn out, causing it to wobble as it turns. And to make up the difference, they decided to use the tape, which isn't a terrible idea, but it's obviously very temporary. So what are my plans for this wheel then? Well, I intend on tacking the metal back in place for the wheel adjuster. That way we can at least test it as a complete mower. Otherwise, when we get the engine started and with part of the mowing deck lower on one side, we could damage the blade as it makes contact with the ground or the table depending upon where we started. As I've mentioned before, this is not a welding channel, so it's just safer if we don't show the process. I will tell you that if we do end up selling this mower, there'll need to be brackets added to the welded areas. There was a lot of rust and I simply don't think the welds will hold up over time, not without some insurance. And even though I know the wheel is going to wobble, I'm still going to install it using my standard methods. And for those of you who don't know, these wheels are only plastic and ride on the axles without any lubricants. That means over time, the plastics will wear down and this is the end result. You don't need to take the wheels off, you can just spray the lube in the space between the axle and the wheel. However, it doesn't work as well, but it is better than nothing, I guess. Now you can do this once a year or as often as you feel like, just don't go overboard with it. And with the adjuster and wheel back in place, it now looks like a proper mower again and not just scrap metal. The next step is to now see if the engine will start and run. But the chances of that happening is extremely low considering that this carb likes to stop working over a long period of time, but it still could happen. And one of the most overlooked items is what kind of gasoline is put into the fuel system. Yes, you most certainly can use ethanol gasoline in the system, but if you can, try finding some without it. After pouring in the fuel, I didn't see any leaks, so we'll then prime the system and then try starting it. So that's not good news at all. It didn't even try and start. Now it could be that the primer bulb isn't working. And if that is the case, we'll then try priming it manually and see if we can get a better result. So what does it mean if we give the engine fuel but it still won't start? Simple, either the engine is worn out or it's missing spark. Now to test for spark, I sometimes like to use my inline spark checker, but there are other ways of doing this. The biggest reason I don't like to use it is because it seems to be easier to use only when it's in the shade. I'll put the mower in the back part of the garage and show you what it looks like. And as you can tell, it's as plain as day that we do have spark. Next, I want to check to see if we have enough compression, and to do that, I'll be using a compression tester. And if the engine is worn out, the compression tester will show it. There's just one problem. The best way would be to spin the engine fast enough to overcome the compression release. However, most people are not going to do it that way, so I'm going to do it the way they're probably going to do it. So let me emphasize this. Doing it this way will give you an inaccurate reading, but it will still tell you if you have enough compression to at least start it, which is what we want to know. This also gives us a chance to inspect the spark plug, and what we find is not good. The plug is kind of wet and it's also covered in deposits which, if bad enough, could cause it to fail. We'll worry about that later on because right now we need to get our compression reading. So with the compression release still working, our reading is very close to 85 psi, which is extremely good. What that tells us is that the engine is not worn out and has enough compression to start and run very well, in fact. If we had done this test using a drill to spin over the engine, I guess the reading would have been at least 150 psi. Using just the rope to spin it is not ideal, but you can still get some useful information from it. Next, I'm going to use my torch to clean off the deposits from the spark plug. You can use other methods to try and clean it, or you can just replace it if that's what you want to do. But it would be quicker if you happen to have a good working spare from a different engine or a leftover from a different project. These don't take up a lot of room, so keeping 1 or maybe 10 of these in a drawer for testing would be nice. Just make sure that you have a comparable spark plug to the one you're replacing. Look at them side by side and make sure you're not putting a long spark plug when the one you're replacing is supposed to be a short one. I know that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised by what you find in these engines. Some spark plugs are longer than others for a good reason, and the same goes for the short ones. So just be careful, and if you're not sure, try asking for help at the store or asking a good friend. I really hope cleaning the spark plug will help solve our starting problem. But if it doesn't, it means we'll have to go even further with our diagnostics. And if it does, it could mean going way further than most consumers are comfortable doing on their own. I'm also going to choose to physically prime the engine only because I'm not sure if the carb is working like it should be. This time, things went a whole lot better. It started on the first pull, and as expected, it sounds pretty good too. It turns out the previous owner took great care of the engine, but I can't say the same thing for the mower itself. So I guess the spark plug was the reason why this engine wouldn't start. And even though I don't recommend changing them as part of regular maintenance, I would at least recommend inspecting them once in a while. And as for the mowing deck, if you don't want this to happen to yours, try cleaning it at least once a year. So my question is, how often do you clean your mowing deck? Or do you just let nature take its course? Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or about your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.